Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Brand Called You. This is a podcast and a video chat in which we talk to some of the most interesting thought leaders from all over the world, people that have stories to tell and wisdom to share. My name is Lisa Lipkin. I'm your host, and if you like what you hear, click the icon below and subscribe afterwards. Thank you. So I'm trying something a little experimental today. We're not talking just to one person. Today, I've invited three people to talk to me, three people that actually share something very unique in common. All of them are expats. All of them chose to lift themselves up, leave their own country, and move to another one. And none of them did it under duress. I mean, we hear a lot of the stories today, of course, coming out of Ukraine, where refugees are being forced to flee due to war. And of course, political refugees, all sorts of people that have to leave their country in order to survive. But this wasn't the case with my guests. This was a choice that was spurned by a dream. And I'm speaking from personal experience because I moved to the Netherlands over 15 years ago. I had been disenchanted by a lot of things happening in America, politically, culturally, socially, and I had this fantasy about Europe. And of course, I was surprised when I got there, not just at how shocking it is to move into a different culture, but how painful it is and how it forces you to really learn your own culture in many ways for the first time. And I want to explore that stretch. I call us in-betweens, one leg in each culture, that pull. And I want to hear from my guests whether they were disappointed or whether their dreams were met, or maybe a combination of both. So let me introduce my guest today. First, we have David Stern. Hi, David.
Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Thank you for coming. David is an internationally renowned artist, a figurative artist who, among many other places, his works are now seen in the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. David came from Germany via Cologne to New York in 1994, and I'll look forward to talking to him in a minute. Hi, Jamie. Jamie Daley is our next guest. Hi, Jamie.
Hi, Lisa. Happy to be here.
Thank you for coming. Jamie is sitting in Paris right now, although she's an American. And Jamie left in, I believe, 2014. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
For what she describes as a life change and an adventure. Jamie has her own architecture and design firm, and she actually has been flourishing in Europe, but also works on both sides of the pond. And I'm really curious to hear about her story too. But I think we'll start now with my third guest, Bob Bragar. Hello, Bob.
Hi, Lisa. That was a great introduction. I don't think I can add anything at all to what you said.
Well, I'll introduce you, though, if you don't mind. Bob was a very successful immigration attorney working, from what I understand, in a swank law firm in New York. And he picked up in, I believe, 1994. Is that correct, Bob?
Yes.
And
I went for a good date, actually.
Well, he moved to the Netherlands, and I want to find out why you would give up that luxury apartment in New York and that great job to move to a cold, dark, windy climate like the Netherlands. So why don't we start?
It was a really great date. I had a great date.
Tell us about it. Why did you leave?
Love.
Love?
I went for the guy. Most of the Americans here went for the guy, in fact. Men and women alike.
So just to translate, you met a Dutch man at a party in New York.
I did. In 1994, just like James. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Jamie and David.
Dave, just like David, it was 1994. And I went to this party and I met this person, and we didn't in fact exchange names or numbers, so we had to go find each other, which was hard. Later, after there was no internet in those days, it was much harder. But it's been 28 years, and it just blows me away that it's been such a big chunk of time. I've lived nowhere else as long as I've lived in Amsterdam. And
but Bob, what's sort of poignant about your story is you said that you would have stayed in New York if you legally could have been married. And that
right, I couldn't. I was an immigration lawyer, and I knew the one thing I did know: I could not get my guy into America. That was clear. It wasn't going to work. There was no visa for him. But for the first 3 years, just to make a long story endless, for the first 3 years, it was sort of a lark, and I assumed things would change. And then in dark of night, Bill Clinton signed the Defense of Marriage Act, and I knew I was screwed. I'd never had a law aimed at me before. It prohibited the federal government from acknowledging any same-sex relationship for any purpose. And suddenly what became a lark became a life sentence. And it's been awkward ever since. But today I love it. You know, I go back and forth. It changes from day to day. I'm so happy to be in Amsterdam. I cannot begin to tell you. It's great. How
did it, I mean, there was much more tolerant and open towards gay marriage when you arrived in the Netherlands. Did it change your sense of yourself? Did it make you reflect on America?
Yes, absolutely. To get married, to be with a partner who's from a different time and place than you are, is to take over a whole new reality. I mean, in New York, I had been with other people cut from more or less the same slice of bread that I was cut from. And that was that. And yes, being with a Dutch person was entirely different. He assumed different things. He came from an immensely gay-friendlier society than I did. And it was wonderful, but hard also.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Jamie, you said adventure. Tell us about what you just one day said, I'm moving to Paris, or had it been a dream of yours?
I had been to Paris before many times, and I came. It's a weird story and it doesn't make sense, but I was here for a friend's wedding. We stopped in London on the way, and I got off on the metro, and I had this feeling. I was still in the metro, and I was like, I have to live here. And when I went back, I was like, I need to move to Paris. Everyone's like, oh, it's so beautiful. It's so amazing. And I'm like, even in the dirty metro, I had this feeling, I have to live here. I have to live here. And I've never felt that way before. And if I ever feel it again, I will follow it anywhere. So I went back to New York. So I was going to live and die in New York. I went back to New York, and I asked my boss at the time, can we open an office in Paris? And she was like, no. So I waited it out 6 months, and the feeling didn't subside. So, you know, in December, I quit my job, I quit my life, and I moved here.
So you didn't start your design firm till you were in Paris?
No, I was working for someone else. Yeah. So my design firm kind of was born here.
Where did you get the balls to do that?
I'm telling you, it was a feeling. It was like an undescribable, like I can only describe it like when people like are house hunting and they walk into a house and they're like, this is the one. Or like you meet someone and you're like, I know I'm going to like fall in love with this person. It was just that, but it wasn't like a tangible thing, because I was just in the dirty metro. So I just had this feeling, and I was like, I have to do it. And, you know, I will do it 100 times over again if I have that feeling. I haven't again yet, but still going strong here.
Yeah, but you know, following an instinct is more complicated for so many of us. It took me 10 years to finally move to the Netherlands, because I was raised by a war survivor who was laden with fear, and I didn't think I could cross the street, let alone the ocean. And you didn't seem to have that.
I mean, I think I'm like a natural born adventurer. I'm like a Sagittarius, so it's always in me to go for that. But I think if I had known what I was getting into, like the hurdles with the visa, the hurdles with like starting my own business, to meeting friends, I didn't know anyone here, I would have had more trepidation, but I went in so naively that it was just easy to kind of like jump in head first. I think if I had overthought it or even gave myself like the time, it probably would have been a lot harder.
Well, you know, you bring up a good point, which is I found that arguably there was nothing more complicated or difficult in my life than entering a new culture, even one that seems like ours on the surface, even one where I could really work in English, was filled with nuances. And I know, David, you've talked about the struggles coming to America during the Clinton era, where there was at least this illusion of globalization and no borders, right? And then you find yourself in, I think, a different America, no?
The different America that came, you know, that arrived only by 2016. But I lived through some shocks here. There's no question about it. I mean, I lived here during 2001, 9/11, a hurricane, a blackout, you know, all kinds of New York catastrophes, so to speak. But I can actually very much relate to what Jamie said about feeling. And I left also because of a feeling. My feeling was a little bit negative feeling, because I had the feeling I needed to leave Germany. I needed to leave Europe behind, like this kind of constraining situation where in these countries there is not so much of upward mobility than in the United States, or at least a possibility. So so that was the driving force. I did not know anybody, also related to Jamie, did not know anybody in New York. Had been only here once before in Washington D.C. and I jumped into it. Yeah, pretty
Can I
much.
just
And I was
talk-
pretty. And it was pretty. I was a little bit old already. A little bit older. So I was 38 years old when I did this, and I had a family which I was dragging along. So
David,
Can I just talk to one thing about changing?
yeah,
Because the thing is that it's a constantly moving target. Not only is the country you left changing, so America has changed immensely since '94 when I came here,
Yeah.
but the country you went to is changing also. So you've got these two constantly moving targets. And it occurred to me this morning that when I was in America, if I was ever unhappy, I had a lot of complicated reasons why I was unhappy. But here, if I'm unhappy, it's because I'm here. It's very simple. It sort of simplifies everything. I can blame it all on the fact that I'm here. And it's they're moving targets. America has changed so much that recently I felt like I escaped. I had a lucky escape, frankly.
escaped in what way? Escaped
that's
in what
pretty much the same way I feel about Germany. I could say the same thing.
A raised level of aggression and greed. Electing Donald Trump, to normalize Donald Trump, just sort of says it all. To normalize that level of vulgarity and greed is the shift that occurred in the nation from '94 to 2016. But it's always nice to be there. I love to visit. It changes from day to day. This is truly a moving target. The feelings, and Lisa and I have talked about this at length, ad nauseum. It changes from day to day.
But David, you said something very interesting in a beautiful essay you recently wrote, where you said, it's something that's something we take for granted, that when you got to New York, you were shocked that there were buildings that were still standing from the 1940s, because of course you were raised in a city which was bombed.
Yeah.
But I have a different take on that. I noticed that in Europe, the most innovative cities are the ones that were bombed, because they're not impeded. Their memory can start anew. That somehow if you erase a physical structure, you're a little bit freer to start anew. And I feel like they became the most innovative cities, like Rotterdam and Berlin and so forth. But maybe I'm curious about your, this idea of continuity for you in New York. And
no, that's certainly true. I mean, I was in that essay, I was more talking about the kind of a culture shock, to have some kind of a culture shock, because you realize that the war happened just in Europe. And I was born like 11 years after the war. And I remember like empty spaces between buildings, which were still full of rubble from, what was called the Trümmergrundstück, right? So that was kind of a stark realization to figure out, to see that this has not touched. It has touched. The war did touch America, but not in the way it, almost erased Europe. So that was kind of a very interesting note. But I also wanted to say something about the idea that I don't know. There is certainly, I would assume, there is a difference between being an expat and an immigrant. So an expat is just still. I would assume that Jamie and Bob are still Americans, and they regard themselves as Americans living in France or in Holland. But that's not the same with me. So I look at myself not as a German expat. And the second I got the possibility to get an American passport, I did it. So I came here.
I did that. I got the Dutch passport the instant I could.
But did you give up your American passport, David?
My German
German.
passport.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry,
I gave up my German passport. Yeah,
Wow.
because at that point they didn't allow double citizenship. So the funny thing is, my kids, which all of my three kids have German passports, but my wife and I, we don't have it anymore. So I was really
that's a monumental decision, in so many ways.
Yes, I came here with the direct idea to stay here. I did not want to try it out, or I didn't want to go back.
I mean, if you don't mind me just stating the obvious, so you also had mentioned to me once that at the time you were raising your small kids, you didn't want to raise them Jewish in Germany, and I wondered if that was a factor for you coming here.
That was for sure also a factor, no question about it. So because it's like, when I grew up, there were like 25,000 Jews in all of Germany, and it was always like a taboo theme, and something which people would not even say Jew.
In Amsterdam is like that too. They whisper the word Jew.
Yeah,
Once you get the word Jewish, the voice goes down.
Yes.
Oh my
Yes,
gosh.
exactly.
Really?
They'll say it, but the voice will go down.
Yeah. And that's a sign for like something which is like so deeply ingrained, which is like kind of, you really don't, it bears down on you. So I didn't want my kids to have the same type of experience. So
You once told me, you said to me, "Oh, all my teachers growing up were Nazis," and I thought you were making an expression out of it, but actually, no, they were.
yes, they were real Nazis. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was.
Did that inform your also need to get out of Dodge, so to speak? The past, the war past, or was it something else?
No, that was so long. I mean, no, not really. But what drove me was my, of course, also my artistic career. So, which I thought would take off easier in New York than, or better, or would like kind of push me further than it would do in Germany or in Europe. But no, that's not, I wouldn't say that. It's like, that was one motive also, the motive being a Jew and the motive being an artist. So, but also I grew up under American soft power. So meaning like, we watched American movies, we listened to American music. It's like kind of, Germany was like a little bit of a colony. An American colony.
Can I just respond to something David said? I belong to a different category than Jamie and David, because Jamie and David went for the play. They saw opportunities there, or a feeling, whatever it was that led them there. Mm-hmm. I at no time went for the place. The place had to happen later. I went for the guy, and the place sort of was part of the package. Mm-hmm. And I had to get used to it. And there were 10 very bumpy years, a spiritual journey of, it must have been so hard for Rick, my partner, to listen to me complain every single day. I cannot imagine how hard it must be to be married, to feel responsible for the happiness of a person who is perennially unhappy. It must be awful. But then one day I just sort of turned the corner, and the light shone, and it was good. But it wasn't about choosing the place at all for me.
What was bad about it for you?
Everything. I mean, why do they do it the way they do it? The whole country seemed to be autistic. It was just, and frugality to a fault. Oh God. I mean, it was hard. And also the language I had to reach the point where the language, something happened to me about a month ago that I realized I was really happy here. I was in surgery, and I was in the recovery room, and I was coming out of anesthesia, and I was just waking up, and I was coming to consciousness. My eyes were slowly opening, and there was a nurse going from bed to bed to bed in the recovery room, and she's chatting in Dutch, and she's sort of making jokes. And before I was even awake, I smiled because I heard something she said, and I understood why it was funny, and I appreciated it in Dutch. And I thought to myself, okay, now I'm home. when I can get the joke even in my sleep, that means things are going better. But that took a long time for my Dutch language ability to get to that point where I got the jokes in a dialect, in a local, the Hague dialect. But it was very funny. I liked it.
I think I avoided learning the Dutch language for years because I loved the freedom of responsibility that it gave me. I didn't have to know what was happening in the world. I think it enabled me to have a legitimate reason to be shallow and removed.
Well, you put them on the back foot also. If you come at them in English, you put them on, in this country, they think they speak English. They don't. They say they do. And you put them on the back foot. And I've come to appreciate that as well. Whenever you speak to anyone in authority, do it in English.
Now, Jamie, I know traditionally French did not take nicely to people that didn't speak the language, but by the time you got there, had it changed? Did you speak French? How did it work for you?
I didn't speak any French, and I was really shy at the beginning to even speak any French. And my experience is that like I would try and speak French and everyone wanted to speak English back. And my French friends will swear up and down that that's not the case. They're like, oh, no, nobody speaks French here. Nobody speaks English here. And I still find that, that's not true. Like everyone is really trying, at least like, the newer generations. But I don't know. I just never I'm lucky, I guess. I never ran into anyone that was really rude or anyone that didn't try and that didn't try at least to understand. Like we try a little bit of French. Like I've never been that stereotypical, like rude, like, no, we're in France. Like you need to speek French. Like I never ran into that. So I'm lucky. I think I kind of like slid by, but it really.
That's before your generation. In the 70s, they did do that shit.
I've heard the stories. I'm sure that they did. I know. It's just, it was kind of like a default for me though, because I knew I could always go into my English. So it took me a really long time to learn French. Like if I could do it again, I would move to like a smaller city at first and, just really immerse myself because I could get by without it for so long.
So I have a question I want to ask all of you, because I know that all of you in your various jobs, it was reflected by moving to another country. And I mean, David, you talked about de Kooning and Franz Klein's suddenly whose art changed immeasurably and it opened up. And I'd love to hear from all of you how this shift in culture and understanding obviously of yourself and your own country kind of affected your artwork. I guess I'll start with David, your work in general. David, let's start with you.
Yeah, of course it changed. I mean, not dramatically in the beginning. So there was no real, I continued doing what I was doing. I was a figurative painter. I worked with strong impasto paints, and I pretty much continued what I was doing. And it was certainly very, very strongly influenced still by European painting, although I was, thinking I'm very strongly influenced by American expressionism. And it took almost, I changed my practice about like 4 years ago and started to paint with acrylic paints, which I still make myself, but with very fluid matter. And that has come to, the results are completely different. And I think these are probably my first really American paintings. So I did a show like 10 years or 12 years ago called The American Years, when I thought I had already lived, long enough in America to call them the American years. But I see now that I actually, I really arrived maybe like 4 or 5 years ago completely. And I wanted to say that also, like in our more general discussion, what I found is that you are taking your own country with you. Funny enough, after like 20 years living in a different, in a neighborhood which had no ethnic or whatever on the Upper West Side connotations, I moved to Washington Heights, and I'm in the middle of like old people who are still, who do understand German, and German is their first language. I go to a synagogue there called KAJ, which was founded by Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. And it has all that German tunes and all the, and I find that I would not have been able to stand that 20 years ago or 25 years or 30 years ago. It's like kind of running away from this. But now it's kind of, it feels good, kind of. So I'm being at peace with my heritage, and at the same time, I'm decidedly American. Or I feel.
Can I just say something? That's the spiritual journey. You go from running away to accepting.
Yeah.
There's a spiritual journey to the whole thing. I was lucky enough to I'm a lawyer, and I found a job as a lawyer here. But the law exists in a cultural context. And I wrote a letter. We were in a dispute. I was general counsel to a microfinance investor. We were in a dispute. And I wrote a letter to the other side. And my boss saw it and pulled it before that email got sent. Because my instinct in the Anglo-American context was to raise the temperature. And I didn't understand that in the Dutch context, the first guy who's a jerk loses. And what I was doing, and also what is defined as being a jerk, the level of jerk is in a very different place in Amsterdam than it is in New York, believe me. And I had to adapt how I practice law in a lot of ways. And now I have infinite respect for Dutch lawyers, but it took a long time. It was a journey.
I mean, you've also spoken about coming back to America and how you feel only judged by your level of productivity.
America is less a society and more a group of economic units. And productivity is, you exist, what are you worth? The old joke, well, I'm worth $1 million. That's not a euphemism. It's what you're worth. It's quite different. Holland is a society in many ways. It's a little country. It's only 15 or 16 or 17 million people, but it's a society, a complete ecosystem in ways that America is not.
I mean, you've given me my favorite line of all time, which is when you're at a dinner party in America and somebody says, "So what do?" You say, "Not much."
Not much, no.
Disarming.
My friends in America recite their resumes without being asked. They'll tell you the last 5 nifty things they did. And if you did that at a Dutch dinner party, they would think you were boorish beyond belief.
That's so interesting.
In America, it's different. It's just different.
Do you find that too, Jamie?
I mean, I find in my line of work, I've noticed, I really realized how much money we spend in America, and how everyone's like, oh, Americans are big and our roads are big and our cars are big. And I realized in my line of work in interior design, I go shopping for, a kitchen faucet, and there's a billion choices in America. In France, there's 4. And I was like, when I first moved here, I was like, no. Where's the real store? Where are the other choices? And it was like, no, we all do that. That's fine. And it was really it really opened my eyes to the way we live, and how things are disposable, and how, it's trends come and go, rip it out, put it in.
Did this affect the way you deal with your American clients? Do you give them some newfound wisdom when you come back and work with them?
I think I've always been I've always been very conscious of, not following the trends, just because personally, I don't like it. So if we're going to do a bathroom or a kitchen or something, about not doing that. I think even more, I did bring over a lot of the aesthetics of the European aesthetics, and the more warmth, as opposed to in America, it was very modern, very clean, very sleek, very brand new. So, and I think it's trending right now overall in my industry, to have more warmth. People used to rip out in brownstones in Brooklyn, gorgeous banisters that were there since, forever, and put in glass Miami. And now everybody wants, the old stuff back.
Yeah.
That's part of this notion of boasting. Boasting is not a distinction, particularly in America. And in this country, it's a bad thing.
Yeah,
that's certainly true. You have to write your resume or but whatever you have to, people embellish here. It's like kind of, that makes themselves really way bigger than they are.
Well, Lisa once said it. She said, everybody wants to be the next big thing. And that really struck me.
Well, actually, what I always found is that in America, you're taught to be interesting, and in Europe, you're taught to be interested. I mean, they both have their value, but actually, David, I mean, you found yourself in a kind of a culture which prided itself on modesty, and you suddenly had to sell your art. And I wondered if that really was torture for you.
Yeah, a little bit. So, but I was like completely not aware of the business aspect of art here in America. So, in Germany, or I'm assuming that probably all over Europe, the same case. It is like that any intellectual, any whatever modestly earner, middle class earners are having original pieces, art pieces on their walls. So, and here I just was really I'm struck that there's only a class of collectors. That's it. So most people don't have original artwork on their walls. I mean, a lot of people would never do, they're making like $200 or $300 or $400,000 a year, but they would never entertain the idea to hang an original piece on their walls, which is like, I find very strange, because to me, it is like, it's part of your culture, it's part of your home. I mean, you have nothing on the walls. It's like kind of strange.
Can I tell you an art story? When I came to Holland, there was the Artotheek, and it was a library where you could borrow original paintings. And the state was supporting, more generously than now, the state was supporting artists. And that meant that artists were producing work, and the work had to go someplace.
Yeah.
And the idea was to put it on people's walls. So you would go to the Artotheek and you would borrow a painting for 3 months or 6 months. You put it on your wall, and you take it back and get another one. You change it.
And I absolutely love that. I love that. That's genius.
It was terrific.
But I'll tell you what's fascinating about that is the Dutch were determined to never have another Van Gogh in their history. And so they were, up until the time I moved there in the late 90s, supporting artists. I mean, you could drool on a canvas and you would get your $700 a month. And I have friends, I mean, they'd call up other friends and say, look, I got to go to Spain. Can you just paint me a picture and turn it in for me? And so what happened was the quality was not recognized. And there was such a massive warehouse stuff, the worst artwork imaginable. And of course, that's the flip side of a kind of,
there were whole buildings dedicated to it. They would take entire buildings in the downtown and just say, this is for the artist, and go. And people were busy. I have friends who survived that way for years. Let's talk about boasting for a second. I just want to come back to this question of whether boasting exists. Because in America, boasting doesn't exist. Boasting there's no distinction, boasting or not boasting. Everybody's boasting. I got an email a few years ago from a woman who signed it under her signature box, best-selling New York Times author. Best-selling author. She's got it baked into her signature line on the email.
And it's not embarrassing.
So I said to her very gently, listen, darling, when you send emails to Holland, take out the best-selling New York Times writer or author part, because the basic assumption is if you have to say it, then you're not. And if you are, then we'll know it. But you really shouldn't be throwing it at people like that.
But I mean, what I want to reference comment about that is that these nuances in language and culture were so painful to me. And I'm assuming to you guys too. So for example,
your instincts are wrong. You lose your instincts when you move. You lose your ability to predict responses. Mm-hmm. You keep putting in stuff that's not working the way you expect it to work. And that's hard.
I mean, I remember doing a storytelling coaching with a company, working 6 hours. And at the end of the day, all I said to them was, you all did great. And they were great, so American. The idea that I would use an expletive was so, and it was fascinating for me, being forced to reflect on the simple uses of an enthusiastic word. David's laughing because I think you know what I'm talking about, right?
I do.
Yeah.
I just heard that today. I walked through with a client and I brought my architect and with a new client, and she's like, "Oh, this is so great. You guys are doing so great." And the French architect left. She's so American. Like by complimenting what we're doing. It's so funny.
But they do the same thing. They'll say "c'est génial" in France, and they'll say in Dutch. There are expressions that are sort of the same. They just like to trash Americans. It's sport.
But I think, I think one of the things we just said before, the boasting, everybody's boasting. Indeed, in America, it's really the case that everybody is shouting. Everybody's shouting. It's loud. You have to, particularly in New York, you have to be louder. You have to shake, and the best thing is like not shouting, but also shaking. So in order
Quentin Crisp, the great Quentin Crisp, the British migrant who hadn't left London until he was 73 years old, and he went to New York, said it the best. He said, "I came from a country where for 1,000 years they told us what crops to grow and what gods to pray to. And I went to a country where a vast number of people lived 5 miles from their nearest neighbor, and they suddenly realized they had to perk up and get friendly and make relationships, or else they wouldn't survive." And those two things, those two cultural backgrounds, are immensely different.
I heard somebody once say that all of America's problems can be traced to too much space, which is quite interesting.
Well, particularly in Republican areas, yeah.
But I also wondered, there's a kind of literalism that I found pervaded American culture, that the onus, for example, as a storyteller, was always on the listener in Europe, and it's on the teller in America. That America's the only country where everybody comes up to me and says, "Is that story true?" And I wonder if you guys find that in your work too. There's more of an ability to see beyond the obvious in Europe, or am I fantasizing here? I mean, I'm just wondering if you find there's more of a literal culture in America.
Nah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Interesting.
I think America has more of an oral culture than the. So I mean, the storytelling. That's an American profession. I mean, this is not a European profession. Nobody tells stories. I mean, you have MASH, and you have like stories you have storybooks, but also the talk cycle. Like people are going on not talk shows, but going on lecture series. People are interested in lectures. People are very capable of public speaking in America, which is like amazing to me. So it's like I don't think I have seen that in Europe at all.
But the Dutch are different. The Dutch are very concerned about factual truth. This is a nation of engineers whose existence isn't about fighting the water. So they want to get it factually correct. And the idea that there's a negotiable narrative that you could talk about is terrifying to them.
Right.
Oh my gosh, I would go crazy there.
Yes, in 5 minutes.
But let me ask you guys something, because I always think you don't really come to appreciate your culture till you leave it. We all know what frustrated us about our cultures that we left, but what did you learn to really appreciate in your own culture having left it? Start with Bob.
Oh, chattiness. I'm a big chatter, and I've had 20 years of silence here. Until firstly, it's not a chatty culture anyway, but the language barriers, they say they speak English, but they don't really. They're all, and chattiness. I like the friendly. On the other hand, America goes too far. I was telling David earlier that in America they talk at you, especially in Florida parking lots. I don't know why. Strangers will walk up to me at the Publix parking lot and tell me what they think about that guy standing over there. Why are they collecting the carts better, faster? Strangers, but I do appreciate the general chattiness. Yes.
How about you, Jamie? What did you come to appreciate about America when you left?
I really appreciate that we're very open to like shifting careers and like shifting ideas and whatnot. Like in France, I found that like if you go to school for something, you're going to go to school for that. You're going to be in that profession forever. It's very rare for someone to go to school to be an accountant and become an artist, whatnot. And I feel like, you know, as cliche as it is, like in America, everybody's open to us, like kind of reinventing ourselves and, you know, changing. And I like that dynamicism. And even in the way, like in New York, like I love going back the way that they dress. Like, and for me in France, like everybody's like chic, but they all like kind of dress the same. Nobody really colors outside the lines for various reasons. Cause I heard that like when in school, you know, if you went outside the lines, like you got cast, like, you know, screamed at and like ostracized. So it's like ingrained in them forever. Like, you know, so I miss that like fluidity of like change and being able to like reinvent yourself of America.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. David, how about you about Germany? Was there anything you've come
Yeah,
to?
funny. I was just thinking about it, and you know, as much as I appreciate the American informalities in any different situation, I actually miss German formality. You know, that's why I love to go to that shul, to that synagogue, where, you know, like you are supposed to wear a hat, you know, so you cannot be called up to the Torah if you don't wear a hat. And people wear bowlers there. So it's like kind of, it's really ridiculous, but I like it. It's like, and I'm missing the, you know, you're all gonna laugh now, but I miss the German humor, you know? So it's like, there's a certain way of sarcasm, you know, like really deadpan sarcasm, which is directly attacking you, but it's, you know, it's being delivered as humor. So I'm missing that a little bit as well.
I understand.
Yeah.
I imagine in New York, you could try that. It might go over.
Yeah,
It depends on the person,
yes.
but you know, if there's anywhere you can
Yes,
like
yes,
stand
it's
straight.
true.
Yeah.
It's
I don't
true.
think
Yeah,
they do
exactly.
subtlety in New York. I think you got to hit people in the head in New York.
Well, I came to really miss the optimism, which I'm not sure, I think is waning, obviously. But I didn't realize, I left because I thought Americans were so naive and too optimistic. But actually, I've come to understand that it is that optimism which has allowed the reinvention, this capacity to flourish and to get to change, and you know,
But
all
isn't
that.
that a survival mechanism in an unstable society? Isn't that really an essential survival technique? In a country that won't support you, you clearly can't count on stuff in America. Unless you reinvent yourself and you try to be the next big thing, it's going to be bad in your old age. I mean, it's
So you're suggesting optimism is an outgrowth of the fact that you can't count on anybody or anything. That's interesting.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I think there's a different dynamic here. It's like, I believe that the largesse of the country, this continent, which America is has an influence on probably even a genetic influence on people, and there's a certain dynamism here, which probably has been taken. You know, look at the. I think who wrote this. It doesn't matter. When you look at the American natives, they were the most adaptive people of all time. So, you know, just an example. I mean, they did not grow up. You know, our image of the whatever Western American native is that one on a horse, right? And riding a horse without a saddle, without anything, and just, you know, clinging to the horse. And you have to realize they didn't have horses in America. The horses were brought by the Europeans in 1460 or something like that. So they adapted like very, very quickly, but they lived with them. So they are really, and I think like that there's a deep influence of this type of dynamic, which actually can be felt until today.
It's interesting what you're talking about, David, about space, the influence of physical space on cultural background is very interesting. And one of the things I appreciate in Amsterdam is the Netherlands is a very crowded country. It's very densely populated. But what that means is that they have to do a lot of planning, and space is precious. But Amsterdam has the sort of the right balance of urbanity that I like. And I really think it's about just how dense or not. I agree with you. It's about how dense or not dense spaces are. Am I making any sense at all?
Yeah, but I also
really do. But what I found particularly interesting in the Netherlands is that although it's a very crowded country, they make their houses and their spaces appear like almost like transparent. So there's a lot of large windows, and people don't have like any draperies on.
They negotiate the circumstances. They do. That's exactly right. Yes.
And that makes it actually look more open. And if you go from the Netherlands to Germany, you find like immediately you have these massive houses and like small windows, and it's like more like a castle, like a. So yeah,
it's also that the class struggle has been different in this country than it has, for example, in France, or I don't know Germany so well. But the tensions about where you come from and where you're going that are sort of built into stuff have a different flavor in this country. The bad word is the Polder model. It's a hang together society in many ways. That's their definition of democracy, is that we'll all hang together. It's a very different definition of democracy than the Americans have. Which is that we'll all shout, and he who shouts the loudest gets everything. It's an eternal subject. You can pick at this stuff forever.
It is eternal. But I'm so glad that you all have been willing to share just what is the tip of the iceberg, clearly. And I want to thank you all so much. I feel like we're just beginning, but it's a fascinating subject, and I'm looking forward to seeing how all of you flourish and continue to grow in your various cultures. So you'll have to keep back with me, and we'll come back in another year and we'll figure this out.
Thank you, Lisa.
In the meantime, thank you all so much.
Thank you, Lisa. And it was nice to meet you all and hear about your stories too.
It was great. And looking into all of
I only ask everybody to wave. I really want waving at the end of a Zoom call. Thank you.
Yeah. Instead of shouting, right?
Instead of shouting, yes.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.